Are you really free? Do you consider yourself living in absolute freedom? Before you say yes and no, hold on to your answer till the end of this video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. This concept of freedom, this concept of living our life the way we want it, is something which is dear to every human being. Because the nature of consciousness, the nature of humanity, or the very nature of life is about expansion. Nobody likes to be constricted, nobody likes to be confined. But what we talk, what we consider as freedom, is it truly freedom? My today's video is going to throw light on this concept of freedom and what real freedom actually means. And towards the end of this video, most of you will probably have a realization or a glimpse of what real freedom actually means. Now, when we talk about the conventional layman understanding of freedom, the only understanding we have is that you are able to do anything what you want at a given point of time without any confines or restrictions. But what if I ask you, what you consider that you are going to do, is it coming from a place of your own habits? Is it coming from the place of compulsive drives? Habits which you have conditioned yourself consciously or unconsciously over the course of your life, is it a product of that? Because most of us are creatures of habit. Human beings are creatures of habit. And most of us know that we shouldn't be doing something, but we still succumb to that habit. I'm reminded of a beautiful instance in the epic Mahabharata, where there's a conversation with Duryodhana and one of the elders in the family. And one of the elders in the family in this case is Lord Krishna himself. And Lord Krishna has a casual conversation with Duryodhana and he says, Duryodhana, probably you are ignorant of the things which you are doing. Probably you don't know that these things are not right. Duryodhana replies to Lord Krishna saying that, Lord Krishna, I know what I am doing is wrong, but I still do it. Because I don't know, for some reason, my senses, my consciousness pushes me towards the direction of doing wrong. Now, consciousness would not be the right word. Compulsiveness, his compulsive tendencies pushes him to do that activity. Now, there is a very interesting thing hidden in this narrative. Most of us are driven by compulsive tendencies. Now, these compulsive tendencies can be very subtle and they can be very gross. One of the compulsive tendency is the need for validation, is the need for public acceptance. Whenever you find yourself in a place where you know deep within that you shouldn't be doing something, but you still end up doing, you are essentially a slave to your compulsive drives. What you consider as freedom is not freedom, but you don't realize this because you think that's natural. Because the world is doing that, hence you should also be doing that. It is beautifully told that human beings, the reason we are an evolutionary product of the lineage of monkeys, and the fact that monkeys are known to mirror behavior. And that's the reason why we say that it's very important to associate with the right kind of people, because you naturally tend to infectiously catch their good and bad tendencies and qualities. And we are very good in mirroring and copying. Now, what happens is when we are driven through compulsions, when we are driven through compulsive tendencies, we might be feeling that we are living a great life. But deep down, if there is even a bit of conscience, we would begin to realize that what I'm calling as freedom is essentially not freedom. To the contrary, it's absolute slavery. Everyone knows what is right and what is wrong. You don't need to go through spirituality, or you need not read morality for that. Everyone is acquainted with that amount of intelligence deeply ingrained in their own conscience, so that they can distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. But the question is, why do we still continue to do things which don't serve us, and to the contrary, which could lead to our own impediment, our destruction? Reason is compulsions. And someone who has deeply studied spirituality, someone who has deeply observed the concepts of spirituality, will understand this, that the central purpose of spirituality is to bring about a shift from compulsiveness to consciousness. To move from compulsiveness to consciousness is the sole purpose, is the single pointed focus and purpose of spirituality. Spirituality is absolute freedom. Spirituality promises you absolute freedom. When people talked about the concept of renunciation, or in Sanskrit called moksha, they essentially were providing you a symbolic representation of telling you or pointing you towards what true freedom means. There is a beautiful quote by Epictetus which I would like to quote in this context. Epictetus told, and I quote, "If a person gave away your body to some passerby, you would be furious. If a person gave away your body to some passerby, you would be furious. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along, so they may abuse you." Just contemplate and introspect how often that we allow all the other things in the world to enter our mind and play havoc with us. We are very disciplined when it comes to the external situations. We don't like to be controlled. We don't like to be pushed. But how disciplined are we with our own minds? This is a big question mark we all need to address. Because not many people are capable enough to discipline their own mind. And the number one primary reason why they don't discipline their mind is because they lack the awareness that the control panel of their emotions is not somewhere outside, but essentially is within. And because they shirk from taking absolute personal responsibility to the way they feel, they always think that anyone in the world is so powerful that they can influence their mind. We are a slave every second of the day because we are dictated by the outside world how we should feel, how we should think. But most of us think that freedom is all about roaming around here and there and being unrestricted from a physical standpoint. But how many of us are truly free from the thought process of our own mind? How many of us are completely free from the prison and the shackles of our own conditioning? Very few. Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I consider to be one of those iconic philosophers of modern India, whose content is so intellectually stimulating, his content is so intellectually dissecting, that it will make you feel puzzled and it will stun you in a very nice way, and you will question your own understanding of beliefs and thought patterns. There's a beautiful quote by him which I would like to quote. He says, "Freedom from desire for an answer is essential to understanding of a problem." Freedom from desire for an answer is essential to understanding of a problem. Now, someone who would have read Jiddu Krishnamurti's content would realize that his content is not so easily understandable. You would need to read it a couple of times to fully digest it, or to make sense out of it. It requires a couple of readings because it's very intellectually deep and stimulating. But remember this, anything which is precious needs to be explored deeply. Just take the example of pearls. The pearl is there deep down in the ocean. And if you really consider yourself an explorer, not the explorer of the outside world, but the explorer of the inner world, then Jiddu Krishnamurti's work, his content, his books are the go-to place. Now coming back to our main focus. Now when we talk about absolute freedom, we all are very conscious of our own freedom. We all like to live a life which is absolutely unrestricted. But one thing we fail to acknowledge is when we say this line that we want to live unrestricted, what we don't realize is we are not living an unrestricted life, but we are living a life which is slave to the good feel emotions. We are a slave to all those compulsive tendencies which make us feel good in the moment, but they are not essentially good for us in the long term. You take any habit of addiction and you realize this. If addiction was not feeling good, nobody would have encountered and nobody would be a victim of addiction. The reason why people are addicts. Now, when I talk about addicts, right, you might be thinking that I'm talking about folks in the rehab. What if I told you that most of us, somewhere down the line, behave as addicts? If you are someone who cannot be without your smartphone, I'm sorry to break the news, but you are also an addict. Smartphone addiction is spreading like a pandemic. And now there are researches which prove and back that because of smartphone addiction, because of social media addiction, people are getting acute diseases, chronic diseases, which will lead a life of suffering for them. But the problem with these things is they do not immediately have a visual manifestation of their problems. And because they look very appealing to us, because the entire world is consumed in it, and they seem to exhibit a very happy life because of the use of it, we assume because the others are doing it, so probably this is good for us. Hence we also dive into that feeling of because we are so scared of FOMO, fear of missing out. Hence we want to mirror them and do what is acceptable by society as normal. And when we talk about spirituality, when we talk about these unexplored topics, these sound abnormal to few folks. There is this thought process, a stereotypical thought process in communities that spirituality is something to be explored post 60. Now, believe me, I know people who have crossed the age of 60. And one thing you'll realize, if there is a person who never developed a taste of spirituality or spiritual subjects, be rest assured that even after 60, he's not going to be bothered. He's not going to understand even a bit of spirituality, or is not going to take any interest of spirituality. Understand this, that anyone who wants to start off spirituality, there's no age for starting spirituality. This whole concept, this whole thought process that we need to look at spirituality after 60 is an extremely self-defeating prophecy. Reason being, it's like saying that I'll start preparing for the examination after the examination. This life is a very complicated examination. It's a war in itself. Now, when I say it's a war in itself, I don't wish to point towards a pessimistic standpoint. But if you closely observe life, we are constantly in a war zone, bombarded with choices, bombarded with a lot of liberty to exercise what choice I need to take at the moment. And it won't take a second to devastate your entire reputation of 50 years. A 5-second wrong judgment can devastate a reputation that you built for 50 years. Now, the reason I brought in this point is, most of us think that spirituality and these thoughts and concepts of inner introspection should only be done when we are 60 plus. I know people who are 60 plus, and if you talk about spirituality to them, they seem least interested. Reason being, they never developed the taste of spirituality. Developing this taste of knowledge is in itself a very refined taste. And be rest assured that even after 60, you are not going to bother to think about spirituality or talk about spirituality, because you never defined or refined, got the taste of spirituality, and you are a creature of habit. So the 60 years of conditioning is very difficult to undo and suddenly become spiritual. Unless a person has a genuine interest and drive, that's a different story. But most of the people, majority of the population, seldom does transform. So don't postpone exploring spirituality or exploring inner introspection till the age of 60, because this is a recipe for disaster. You might be materially successful, you might enjoy life, but you'll fail to understand the true meaning of life, which is so heavily talked about in the topics of true and authentic spirituality. My today's video was sort of to bring about a viewpoint on freedom which most of us don't want to face, because freedom was always talked about in the physical sense. Nobody talked about the freedom of the mind. Very few people even think in this regard. The fact that so many of us are slaves to the opinions of others, so many of us are slaves to our environment situations. This speaks volumes about the need, about the dire need for understanding the nature of consciousness. As there's a beautiful quote which says, necessity is the mother of invention. Hence, to go deep within, unravel our own conditioning of our mind is itself a process. And the number one reason why people don't want to look at spirituality or don't want to explore this subject is because there's a lot of initial struggle. There's a lot of struggle. And you will find your peers having a good time, having a lala time, and you are reading spirituality. How boring and how non-trendy can that be? But believe me, and this is something which has been coming from people who are at the peak of their life, that the thing which you are investing your time in currently is going to give you a lot of huge returns which the other people are not. Probably they are not even aware of the things you are exploring. And you cannot have the good gifts of both the worlds. The fact is that you need to make your choices which are stemming out of a place of consciousness versus compulsiveness. Because as I said, the whole focus of spirituality is to move from compulsiveness to consciousness. And Mahatma Gandhi put it so beautifully. He said, I don't allow people with their dirty feet to walk in my mind. I don't allow people with their dirty feet to walk in my mind. This is true freedom. This is absolute freedom. So by now, I think you have understood what true freedom is. And now you can answer yourself. You can answer the question. You can answer the question to yourself that am I really free or do I think I am free? And either ways, you know now what to explore and how to truly be free. Because true freedom is an absolute necessity of consciousness. Not the freedom which the world sells you. Not the freedom of indulging in shitty work and spending your time uselessly and recklessly in nonsensical activities. That is not freedom. And to counter or debunk the concept of freedom from the normal standpoint, the layman's definition of freedom, I want to give an example which will sort of contextualize the point I'm trying to drive here. Now, if you look at a kite, when you want to fly a kite, the reason the kite is only able to fly as high as effectively you are able to restrain it. The more the flyer or the person who's flying the kite is skilled enough in restraining the kite or maneuvering the kite in a certain direction, in a certain technique, he is able to successfully let the kite fly to higher altitudes. However, if you cut the thread of the tie and let it be free, what do you think will happen with the kite? The kite will just fall down. The reason why discipline was heavily emphasized in spirituality is not to restrict you, is not to confine you, but to make you absolutely free. Free from the compulsive tendencies, free from the slavery of the senses. Because understand this, unless you are completely free from the slavery of your senses and the slavery of your conditioning, don't ever call yourself free. Because you are in such a dismal condition that you are not even aware that you are constrained. Now, this is a bit deep thought and a bit deep of a narrative, and you probably would need to go through this content a couple of times to fully digest what I just said, because for the very first time this might not be very comprehensible for most of you, but I hope I was able to successfully drive the essence of this video through the understanding of moving from compulsiveness to consciousness. Thank you so much for your time on my video, and if you really liked my today's video, my take on freedom, on absolute freedom, don't forget to give me your valid, candid feedback. Also subscribe to my channel if you are liking the content I am sharing on a regular basis in this channel. Thank you so much, and I will meet you in the next video. Bye.